There are really five different methods of research that sociologists use to collect different types of data on behavior. The first one is natural observation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. The researcher or investigator observes the daily activities of a group that they decide they need to study or want to study, but they do nothing to get involved in the daily activities. All they do is observe it. For example, if the principal comes in and observes a teacher, they don't do the worksheet, or they don't take the tests, or they don't do the activities. They're just there to watch and see how the students are acting, how the teacher's acting, how effective all of that is. And so most of us are quite familiar with natural observation. So thinking about that there are 4 or 5 different methods of research for sociologists, there has to be some advantages and disadvantages. So you need to go to the worksheet in your packet that looks like this. We're going to talk about all of these different types of methods, and we're going to compare them based on the concepts of time, cost, the environment, their knowledge, and their accuracy. All right, so natural observation, I'm going to give it a 4 stars just because it does take a lot of time for you to truly get a good idea of what is going on when you observe behavior. You can't just pop in and look at them for a minute and go, yep, that's what happens every minute of every day. So you need to do that more often, and so it does take a lot of time. The cost, the reason why natural observation is done a lot is simply because it is very cheap. You have very few things that you would need as far as cost, maybe some paper to jot down the behaviors that you see or those sorts of things, but really it doesn't cost you much to observe a group. The environment, you observe a group in their natural environment. That's in the title itself or in the name of the method. So the natural environment is where they normally meet. So if I want to study sociology class behavior, I don't pull sociology class into the PE room or the gym or wherever and ask them to go about their normal activities, because that's not in their normal or natural environment. Do they know they're being studied? Yes, usually they do know that they're being studied, and of course we know that that can affect their accuracy. If people know that they are being watched, whether it's little kids, high school kids, adults, teachers, employees, if they know they are being watched, their behavior tends to change. And I don't mean it always changes for the better. I did some recordings of my classroom, and there were students that specifically behaved worse because they thought it was funny to do so. So it doesn't necessarily change it for the better, but it definitely changes it. Now, looking at all of these things, we need to decide, is this a good thing or a bad thing about natural observation? If everything was a positive, nobody would do anything other than natural observations. But time, the fact that natural observation takes a lot of time, that's a negative. So that'd be a disadvantage. Costs being very cheap, that makes it an advantage or a positive thing about this method. Being in the natural environment clearly makes people behave better, more natural, more normal, instead of putting them in a lab and experimenting on them. They're in their natural environment, so that's a good thing. The fact that they know they're being studied, as I mentioned earlier in my example, is a disadvantage because most people then change their behavior, either for better or for worse. And accuracy, that is a disadvantage. It's not very accurate for a couple of reasons. One, because people know they're being studied, and so they change their behavior for better or for worse. Also, it's not very accurate because you as an observer might have a particular bias. In other words, you're only watching the girls, or you're only tending to look at the left side of the room or the front of the lab instead of the back of the lab. And so this changes your accuracy because you're not really observing everything that goes on in that group you're studying. The second method is participant observation, and this is what you have been working on all by yourself when you're studying a specific group that you already belong to. So when you, the researcher or the investigator, are actually part of the daily activities, you're already a part of that group that you want to study. You're not being an outsider, so you're going to come in as a person that's already there, and now you're going to secretively observe the behavior of this group. One example of this is John Laughlin studied the divine precepts, a cult, and so he originally started as a natural observation, and so he went up to the door, he knocked, and he said, "I would like to observe the behaviors of your group, would you mind?" And they said, "No, come on in." So he went to weekly meetings and observed their behavior. But after a couple of weeks, he realized, I don't think I'm getting accurate observations because I don't think they're behaving like they normally do because I'm here watching them. So he turned it and he said, all right, now I've been observing this for a couple weeks and I'm done with my research now, but I really like what you're doing here and I would like to join your group, join this cult. And so he joined the cult and took part of the daily activities, and he was one of them. And really what he was doing was making mental notes and jotting things down on the side of what he saw going on. And he got a much better view of what this Divine Precepts cult was really like and what daily life was like. Now again, advantages and disadvantages, same thing. There are going to be some good things and bad things about each of those. So go ahead and turn back to that sheet. And again, we're going to compare them on the same factors. So time, just like natural observation, you definitely have to spend a lot of time observing your group of people. For your particular individual assignment, I asked you to observe your class 5 times. And that's still not going to get you a completely accurate picture of what happens in that class every day. Cost, again, you're just observing. The only thing you might need to do is have the paper to jot those things down on. Maybe you have to pay for a membership if you're going to be, if you're going to observe behavior at the YMCA, you might have to join the YMCA or things like that. But for the most part, if you're already part of the group, it's not really going to be cost up and beyond what you're normally paying. The environment, it's done in its natural environment. You are observing people in their normal habitat. Do they know they're being studied? No, they shouldn't. If you are doing your participant observation accurately, you absolutely should not let them know that you are observing their behavior. So instead of them acting better or worse because they know they're part of your research, they're going to act normal. Accuracy, well, since you're part of this group, you tend to have a slanted or biased opinion of what normal, quote unquote, normal is. And so that makes it accurate, but a little less accurate than maybe some of the other methods, so I gave it a 2-star. Now, as far as advantages and disadvantages, negative or a disadvantage for time because it does take a long time to get accurate results. Cost, that's an advantage because it's really cheap. It's done in their natural environment, so just like natural observation, you get good results, so that's a positive thing. They don't know they're being studied, so that also is a positive thing. And accuracy, it's not really the most accurate method, but it's also probably not the worst either. So therefore, I'm still going to make it a disadvantage. The third method of studying sociological behavior is the experiment. Most of you are quite familiar with experiments because you've taken part of them, maybe in science classes, or maybe actually in the outside world. So it's a study of a group that is performed or carried out in a very controlled environment, and the purpose of that controlled environment is to eliminate any outside forces from affecting the behavior. So we can narrow it down and say people behaved this way because of this. So an experiment really has significant conclusions because of the fact that you're going to control everything. My example of an experiment is the Milgram Experiment, And Stanley Milgram, after World War II, was very curious why Nazi soldiers, Nazi military personnel would obey authority. Even they knew the orders that they were supposed to follow through with were completely wrong and irrational and just inhumane. And so he wanted to study why people obeyed authority. And so what he did was he set up this Milgram experiment. And he had a laboratory where he had the learner, which is the L down here, and this was actually the person that was part of the experiment, that they had volunteers to come in. The teacher here, who was running the electrodes, for example, you can see was connected to this person, the teacher was actually in on the experiment, so they were not unknowing of what was going on, but the learner was. And then of course the experimenter, like Milgram, who is in the room to make sure all the procedures are done correctly. Now, the pictures that I have here is, here's the box that the people were hooked up to, and this particular thing shows that there are different levels of electricity that the learner would be subject to by the teacher if they didn't learn a series of word pairs. So they would say blue, box, bird, shirt, tongue, and you would have to say blue, bird. Okay, and so that would make much more sense. If you didn't say that, you got a low level of shock. It went from 45 volts up to 450 volts. And 450 volts, it says on the machine, is extremely dangerous. And so as they went up. Now, the learner, the learner was actually the one that was in on it, and the teacher was not. Sorry, I had that backwards. So the teacher is the one that's going to administer the shock, and the teacher is the one that's going to read the word pairs to the learner. Now, the learner is the one that was in on it, and the learner is just faking it and screaming bloody murder and just saying, oh, I'm in so much pain, I can't continue, and would stop talking, and then the teacher would be like, okay, what's going on? And the experimenter was there to prod them on. If they don't give you the correct answer, you need to administer the shock and continue. Well, what if they don't answer? They said, well, then you need to tell them the correct answer and administer the shock and move on. And so there were several different experiments that went on, and some were with all men, some were with all women, some were with the experimenter out of the room versus in the room. There was also where there were 2 teachers and 1 learner, so they would kind of divvy up the responsibility, so to speak. And this was instrumental in discovering why people behave authority.